Welcome to another episode of Cooking with Alex. For today's recipe, you are going to need 1 cup of XCOM, 1 cup of Slay the Spire, and 3 tablespoons of RPG. Mix the ingredients for 10 to 12 hours, add artificial feudal Japan flavor to the mix, and let it rest. And that, my friends, is how you make a Mahokenshi.
God damn,
Alex?
this some serious gourmet shit.
Welcome to Ye Old Entertainment, and welcome to another episode of
Ye Old Gamer Recommends, with an asterisk, so pay attention.
Mahokenshi is a turn-based tactical game with RPG elements that uses card-based combat mechanics, and it takes place in a feudal Japan fantasy setting. But why the asterisk? Well, to say this game isn't for everyone would be a monumental understatement. If anything, Mahokenshi is as niche as a game gets, which in my book explains why it didn't get a better user score on Steam. But if you like games that challenge your tactical prowess, if you like to see RPG-like progression systems in games that aren't purely RPGs, if you don't mind, or if you like the theme of feudal Japan fantasy, and if you don't mind painfully generic stories,
and that's one big if,
then you are going to love Mahokenshi. But if one or many of these things are not your cup of tea, then you're probably better off taking your hard-earned $24.99 elsewhere, or you can stay a while and listen to see if this is something that might appeal to you. The game takes place in the Celestial Islands, an archipelago of floating islands. Some dark evil being has awakened, and he has found a way to invade this floating realm. And of course, he's brought a wide cast of evil minions along to make everyone's lives miserable. And it's up to you, the ruler of the island, who's never ever mentioned again in the game after the intro, to command the 4 most prominent houses of the Celestial Islands and their champions into glorious battle to stem the tide of evil. So yes, it's generic as fuck, it's more an excuse than a story really. But hey, an excuse is all you really need to embark upon the adventure. And this adventure will have you going from one island to the next in hot pursuit of the next evil MacGuffin. There is a critical path of mandatory missions that you must complete, but there are also many secondary missions and even additional side quests that you can accept from various NPCs. Effectively completing these missions will give you experience and crystals of the Mahoken. Gathering experience will eventually make your champions level, and every other level champions get new cards added to the game's various stores and card troves, or new artifacts that may be equipped and used during combat. The crystals of the Mahoken, on the other hand, are used to purchase upgrades in 3 different talent trees. So it goes without saying that while many of these missions aren't mandatory, taking them on and being as thorough as you can will make you level faster and acquire more and better upgrades sooner in the game. The bulk of the game takes place in isometric maps that consist of terrain tiles, and these can be forests, plains, mountains, and hills. And amidst these topographically diverse lands, you'll find a series of buildings and other landmarks that provide various services and boons, and some others that you'll need to defend from time to time depending on the mission. These landmarks include stores from which you can buy cards, shrines where you can discard or enhance some of the cards that are currently in your deck, and palaces where you can get powerful artifacts. You have 4 champions to choose from to take on these missions. Not all of them are available from the get-go, but you unlock all of them fairly quickly as you progress through the game. Each of these champions has his or her own unique deck, but the most basic attack and move cards are common to all of them, much as it happens in Slay the Spire. And the good news is that you can switch champions between missions. Your objectives in each of these maps vary significantly from mission to mission, and I think they are masterfully designed, in the sense that they require you to come up with a new game plan for every mission. Because while each of your champions has a clearly defined strategic approach, you are going to need to work out different tactics for every mission. In this mission, for example, you have to protect these villages from the invading horde of monsters. These monsters have spawn points, and every certain number of rounds, they spawn a new bad guy. But there are also boons that you can collect and stores that you can visit that sell cards that will make it easier for you to defeat these guys. But getting to these places takes time and energy points, which is the resource that you use to move around and fight in Mahokenshi. And you also want to discard some of your common cards to increase the likelihood of you drawing the cards that you want. So you have to pay careful attention to the spawn cycle of the bad guys, the time it takes for them to reach the villages, the energy points and number of rounds that you need to spend to get to each of these places, your health, and the type of terrain where everything is now and where everything will be in a few rounds. But then there is this other mission that requires you to kill 3 demon lords before they reach a portal that's located at the other end of the map. Each of these demons has the capacity to hinder your character in different ways for many rounds, and the level design is the most complex and treacherous in the game. Amongst other things, because it's filled with choke points that you can use to your advantage, but that may also be used by your enemies to block your path and delay your progress. And these are just two of many examples. And be aware, you cannot go through this one as though you were a body positivity activist mercilessly devouring everything in sight at the local all-you-can-eat joint.
This some serious gourmet shit.
And that means that it's best enjoyed in small servings. Unlike most other games that I've been playing recently, I just couldn't play Mahokenshi for more than 2 hours every day. Not because it gets boring or same-ish, it's just exhausting. But not in a bad way, it just drained all my thinking power. I was even tempted to open a TikTok account after one of the sessions. But the fact that the game's story does not make the best case for you to get super excited about the next mission might have also had to do a little bit with this. But don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that you are going to be banging your mouse and keyboard in frustration if you're not a tactical mastermind, as it happens with other games. Mahokenshi allows you to make mistakes, and it even allows you to half-ass the missions without you having to resort to some bullshit measure like lowering the difficulty. So how does it work then? Every mission has victory and defeat conditions, but it also has challenges, like completing the mission before turn X, or clearing Y number of objectives in less than C turns, or keeping all of your allies alive throughout the entire mission, or others. And meeting the most basic victory conditions isn't all that difficult. But the additional challenges are for the most part a measure of your efficiency, and the more efficient you are in these missions, the faster you are going to progress through the game's talent trees. And this of course is going to make your life easier for future missions. And this speaks volumes of the game's design. The game gives you many good reasons to repeat these missions and try to 100% them. You might want to prove to yourself that you are up to the challenge, or you may want to make as many crystals of the Mahoken as possible, so that you can purchase upgrades in your talent trees quicker, or you may want to level up that champion that you have been neglecting because you have always chosen to take the mystical hot chick for every mission. But if you find some missions to be too freaking hard and draining, you can always say, fuck this shit, and move on to the next. I know I did from time to time. Guys, I truly am in awe with the game's design. I think it's absolutely brilliant. These guys at Game Source Studio know their shit, I'm telling you. Not all their design decisions were to my personal liking, and we are going to be talking about some of those later, but overall, this game delivers its very complex premise in a way that is lean and uncomplicated, and that's not an easy thing to do. For starters, Mahokenshi adheres to the principle of easy to learn, hard to master. The game's first island acts like a tutorial, but it doesn't feel like one because it doesn't over-explain things, and your first mission is part of the game's story. And completing your initial mission successfully only requires you to have a basic grasp of the game's fundamental mechanics. Also, the first champion that you have access to is the most straightforward strategically, since she's mostly all about direct damage. There aren't too many card synergies to worry about with her deck. But as you progress further into the game, chances are that you will come to see the importance of the different types of terrain, and you'll probably start taking them into account for your offensive and defensive moves. Hills, for example, give you an attack bonus, which makes sense because you have the advantage of the high ground, while standing on a forest tile adds a bonus to your defensive capabilities. So for tougher enemies, you might want to move to a hill to strike before you retreat into a forest to take advantage of its defensive bonus, making sure, of course, this forest is not adjacent to a hill. You don't want your enemy to get that nasty attack bonus, do you? Your champions' decks are also interesting and varied. Ayaka's deck, for example, is pretty simple. There aren't too many card synergies to work with, and it may be to your liking if direct damage is your deal. But if you're all about brain-dislocating tactics, then Misaki's deck might be the one for you. Some cards even synergize with terrain attributes, and this adds tremendous tactical value to your cards. And though the deck building aspect of the game in Mahokenshi is nowhere near Slay the Spire's level in terms of depth or card synergies, keep in mind that deck building is only one component of Mahokenshi's gameplay mix. In this game, you have different types of tiles, different victory and defeat conditions for every mission, talent trees, and equipment to worry about. And all of this comes together into a solid, cohesive whole that, despite its complexity, is very easy to understand. It's also worth mentioning that despite the game's unique gameplay mix and the many things you have to take into account at all times, I was never at a loss about how to do anything. And whenever I failed, I was never left wondering what the fuck had happened. I could always tell what had gone wrong and why. But the very best thing about Mahokenshi is that I can honestly say
I did it my way.
I never felt like the game was funneling me into doing things the one way they had to be done. I actually replayed many missions because I wanted to 100% them and because I wanted to level up some of my champions. And every time I replayed a mission, I did things in a way that was completely different from the first time. That doesn't mean you can complete these missions if you play badly. Whatever your game plan is, it has to have strategy, tactics, actions, consistency, or otherwise you're gonna get fucked. I'd also like to mention that the art design in this game is
amazing.
The Celestial Island setting is great as a concept, and its locations are colorful and varied, and more importantly, consistent with the game's tone and vibe. I love the attention to detail that went into the transitions between the various screens in the game. Character art and maps are gorgeous, and even the user interface is a joy to watch, except this font. Dude, what the fuck happened here? The art design in this game is so freaking pro that I find it hard to believe that the same people thought using this font for buttons and other text in the game was a good idea. It's so bad it's almost immersion breaking. Compare this to this other font that's used in the same freaking game. I'm not saying they should have used this font for every text, it obviously wouldn't have worked for longer texts, but man, if you know what works, as you clearly do, why this? It's not all sunshine and bunnies with Mahokenshi, and this font, unfortunately, is not the only thing I didn't like about the game. There are other nitpicks to speak of. Getting these mechanics to work in a lean and intuitive way in a game that features gameplay mix as complex as this one is not an easy thing to do, and the devs nailed it. And that's why I find it very strange that they fucked up some very basic UX thingies, like this extra information that appears when you click on an upgrade in a talent tree. This information is presented in a beautiful way, and the explanation per se is as foolproof as it gets. But in order to make this screen go away, you have to click somewhere else on your screen. There should have been an X button somewhere, especially since they did add an X button in other similar screens. And in some other screens, they have a close collection button. And that, my friends, is what I call lack of consistency, and that's a fundamental aspect of user experience. This is a minor detail, of course, but I am a little bit shocked that they got this particular thing wrong. Now, I know the narrative aspect of the game is probably something I should not be shitting too much about in a game like Mahokenshi, a game that makes it abundantly clear at all times that the story is meant to be an excuse for you to go out there and kill things. But the thing is that after 3 or 4 missions during every gaming session, I felt like I had to take a break. And this was in part because the game is very demanding the first time around, but also in part because there was no significant narrative build-up leading into the next mission. Hell, even Phoenix Point did this better. Look at Expeditions Rome. Its gameplay mix is not spectacular by any means, especially if you compare it to first-in-class titles in its ballpark like XCOM, but the narrative build-up leading into every combat encounter elevates the quality of many passages to the status of
amazing.
Some are even fucking legendary. But the gameplay in Mahokenshi is already amazing. Imagine what it could have been if the story had not been the paragon of genericness. And I can live with an utterly generic and predictable story in a game like this. But what makes it even more disappointing is that, at some point, there's a character who mentions a few very interesting details about the origin of the Celestial Islands and its houses. And that was actually pretty cool. But this information goes out the window just as hastily as it was introduced, and in the end, it amounts to nothing other than a tiny glimpse of what the game could have been in the story department if they had chosen to develop it more. And then there are a few things pertaining the game's challenges that I wasn't particularly crazy about. I felt like many challenges in this game were of the do this before this happens sort. Like kill this guy before it turns such, or complete the mission before the second village is destroyed, or some others that don't openly give you a time limit but become harder and harder the more time you take to complete them. This is the turn-based version of the classic timed mission that I've always detested in other genres. It's not terrible here, but time is the resource I tend to use the most inefficiently in video games, and I am totally okay with that. Investing 3 times the amount of time that the regular user needs to get shit done in a game is almost an Alex trademark strategy. So when a game robs me of that possibility, I am always a little bit pissed. But most of the issues that I have with this game are personal nitpicks that some of you may even count as positives. and they really didn't dampen the fun factor in any significant way. Mahokenshi currently goes for $24.99 on both Steam and Good Old Games. It may seem a little bit pricey for a game that you can 100% in less than 15 hours, side missions and all challenges included, especially considering that this is by no means a AAA game, but I think it's worth every penny. This is a different game, dudes. Its gameplay mix is unique, fun, and challenging, but the challenge escalates gracefully and gives you control over how much you want to be challenged in a way that is both clever and rewarding. And as complex as it is, the developers still managed to make it accessible and engaging. And after this tour de force of pieces of shit that I have been playing lately, Mahokenshi came like a blessing, and I can't recommend it enough if tactical games and even trading card games are your jam. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Share the video, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.